Hey everybody, this is Michael Bryson from This is Bodybuilding. Welcome to episode number 2 of the This is Bodybuilding podcast series. A special welcome to all the patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much. It's you folks who are going to keep this thing going and growing throughout 2021 and beyond. So thank you so much. In the first episode, I did a review of the top 9 of the 2020 Mr. Olympia. And on today's episode, I'll do the same with the top 5 of both the 212 bodybuilding and the classic physique divisions of the Olympia. And since I started with the big boys and open last episode, I think I'll continue with the 212 first and then move into classic. So first off, I thought that both of these divisions were just excellent this year. The guys really brought it. There was great conditioning and polished performances in both the divisions. And actually, we saw some of the guys, many of the guys in each division bring their personal best. They were at their best ever, I'd say. As far as the judging goes, it's really hard to find any fault with the top 5s of these divisions. I think the placings were pretty much spot on, and so, no complaints there. It was a really great job done by the judges. In 212, well, first I'll say how I predicted the show would go, and then I'll tell you what actually transpired. I had predicted a top 5 that would include George Peterson, Kamal Algarne, Sean Clarita, Derek Lunsford, and Angel Calderon Frias, and I'm probably mispronouncing Angel's name, and I apologize for that. I predicted that George would win, and not only that, I predicted that he was going to win by a landslide. And the other guys, I sort of had in the order that I mentioned them just now, but I thought that any order was possible. They could have ended up anywhere in the top 5. Well, Angel did not make the top 5, but he did look incredible. I thought he was awesome. He placed 7th in a really stacked lineup. The top 8 of the show all looked phenomenal. So actually, I'll mention the top 8 in order from 8th through 1st, and then I'll dive more deeply into the guys that were in the actual top 5. In 8th place, we had Derek Oslin, and this was Derek's all-time best, man. I was really proud of Derek and really excited for him. He's a great guy, a great bodybuilder, and this was him at his best. I'm talking leaps and bounds over his previous best. It's great to see, and he's going to be a force to reckon with in the future for sure, for a long time. In 7th place was Angel, as I mentioned before, and in 6th was Ole Kryvyi from the Ukraine, and I'm sure I just butchered his name as well. I'm sorry about that. I didn't even have this guy on my radar going into the show, but man, he looked awesome. This was a really well-deserved top 6 placing. He's a very complete bodybuilder, and I look forward to seeing him in other shows in the future. I'm sure he's going to be a top 5 guy for some time to come after this year. In 5th was Ahmad Ashkanani. In 4th was Derek Lunsford. 3rd was George Peterson. 2nd was Kamal, and in 1st was the giant killer, Sean Clarita. So I'll start with Ahmad. To me, this was Ahmad at his absolute best. Now, I know that he has placed 2nd in both, I think it was 2016 and 2017, but in my eyes, he was just better here. He was just as massive as before, and he had incredible conditioning. He's always had one of the best upper bodies, really, and especially his back is one of the best backs in the division and the IFBB Pro League. But the knock on him has always been his legs, not just the size, but also the separation from the front, the lack of separation actually in the quads. But this year, he was improved. I thought his legs were better. He had a little more separation from the back. The hamstrings were there. They were in nicely. And from the side, his legs actually look great. He's got great tie-ins with the glutes and hamstrings. Looked great overall, and I think his placing was well-deserved in my opinion. In 4th place was Derek Lunsford. Now, Derek's placing here, I think, is very interesting. Derek made his Olympia debut in 2017, and he placed 5th there as his debut, and that was really impressive. And from that moment on, he was sort of heralded as the next big thing in the 212. Some even called him the next Flex Lewis. That might be a little bit too much pressure to put on a young guy, but he did really, really great. In both 2018 and 2019, he placed 2nd, with Flex winning his 7th 212 Olympia title in 2018, and in 2019 it was Kamal that won. Now, the interesting thing to me about this placing is that, always the knock on Derek has been his conditioning. He has a phenomenal structure, great musculature. He's really not missing anything. He just never really dialed in the conditioning 100%, ever. And his other gifts have always been enough to do incredibly well, but just not win the Olympia. And this year, the general consensus, I think, amongst anyone on any platform, was pretty much that if Derek were to come in shredded with striated glutes, the whole 9 yards, he would probably find himself as the new 212 Olympia winner. However, I think people also believe that if he came in how he always did, he probably wouldn't play second again. He would probably slip down somewhere to around fourth or fifth or maybe even lower. I think pretty much most people assumed that was going to be what happened. Well, it's not exactly what happened. As it turned out, Derek brought most likely his best conditioned look to date. His glutes were striated. He had excellent separation in his quads. The hamstrings were in. He looked very hard and conditioned. In terms of hardness and dryness, I don't think he's ever looked any better than that. But his physique lacked its usual pop. It lacked that wow factor. I think the reason for this is likely that Derek probably would be better served moving to open bodybuilding. If he didn't have to worry about making weight, he could match this newfound conditioned look with the former fullness that he had. Now, I know switching divisions is a very personal choice, and I would never tell someone what they should or shouldn't do. But I still think that if he did show up at this type of conditioning at 225 or 230, he could really do some damage in men's open. As far as this placing goes, I do think that the judges were right on. He looked great, but he was a little flat, and some of the guys ahead of him were just a little bit better. I don't think that Derek should look at this as taking a step or two backwards. He actually did improve his conditioning. This was just a learning experience and a step towards whatever is next. Whatever he chooses, whether he moves up in weight or not, the key to placing better and even possibly winning an Olympia title will be to come in both shredded and full. And he's a great talent. I'm sure he's just going to keep on improving. In third place was George Peterson. This was George's first Olympia as a 212 bodybuilder, and followed 3 consecutive years of placing third in the Classic Physique Olympia. So this show marked George's 4th consecutive year of winning a bronze medal at the Olympia, spread through 2 different divisions. I think that's pretty freaking amazing, and actually I can't think of any competitor in the history of the Olympia who's ever done that. I know bronze wasn't the medal that he and Coach Justin Miller were after, and it certainly isn't what I predicted, but it's still an amazing achievement. I spoke to George quite a bit that weekend, both immediately after the show as well as the next day, and I have to say his mindset is just pretty amazing. The guy immediately knew what he did and why he placed the way he placed and exactly what he needs to do to fix it. Basically, it's clear if you watch the show, he wasn't 100% dialed in from the back. There seemed to be a little bit of a slight film of water from the back through the glutes and hams. And, last year in Classic Physique at the Olympia, he was just absolutely peeled. This was only his second show ever as a 212 bodybuilder. And I think he and Coach Justin Miller just needed to get a couple of 212 shows under their belt. He still has a few pounds to go to be at the 212 limit. So I think next year he's looking to continue to keep growing and just come in super shredded. When you debut in any divisions, Olympia, and place in the top 3, like men such as Lee Haney and Phil Heath did, you make a statement that everybody better pay attention to. In second was Kamal. He was the 2019 212 Olympia champion, and the champ came into the show at what I would say was 100%. I mean, last year he won the show on the strength of his conditioning, and this year he was shredded once again, and he even added a few pounds of muscle as well. So, he looked great, and in the end, it was just a 1-point difference between himself and Sean Clarita, and the judges put those 2 guys through a ton of comparisons, and when it was all said and done, really, Sean Clarita was the new 212 Olympia champion. He looked amazing, Sean did. I've watched this guy grow quite literally through the years. I think he was 140 or 145 pounds, something like that, when I first saw him. And now he was 177 pounds, I believe, on this Olympia stage. He was shredded, too. I mean, he and Coach Matt Jansen, they really did a great job. They knocked it out of the park. It was every bit as shredded as Kamal was. But when it comes to symmetry, proportions, balance, flow, and just pretty round muscle bellies, man, the dude's he's hard to beat. Hard to beat that version of Sean Clarita. People have been comparing him to a smaller version of Ronnie Coleman. I can see that, but to me, he's more like a Flex Wheeler or a Phil Heath. But actually, you know what? He's just the first version of Sean Clarita, and that's pretty awesome. It was awesome enough to win the 2020 212 Mr. Olympia. He's a really deserving champion at that, so congratulations to Sean. Now, let's talk classic physique. Going into the show, I predicted that it would be a close battle, once again, between the reigning champion Chris Bumstead and the two-time former champion Breon Ainsley. The last 2 years, these two guys were first and second, with just 1 point separating them. Breon won in 2018 and Chris in 2018, so I figured it would be pretty much the same way this year, and I kind of predicted that Chris would pull out the victory. I also predicted that Logan Franklin would make the top 5, and I thought that he might place as high as 3rd. I predicted that Alex Cambronero would be in 4th with Terrence in 5th, and that would round out the top 5. Alex had won the 2020 Arnold Classic and Classic Physique, so and Terrence was 2nd there, so I figured, including them in the top 5 was pretty much a no-brainer, a given. Now, it actually turned out quite a bit differently than what I predicted, but not as crazily different. In some places, it wasn't so crazily different. How it actually went was, well, first off, Logan did not make the top 5 this year, but he did look great. He actually placed 9th. At the show, I actually thought he should have been in 8th. But either way, it was a strong Classic Physique Olympia debut for Logan. He's got great potential to do great things in this division. He's already won the New York Pro last year, and I'm sure he's going to go on to do great things in Classic Physique, and will probably be in the top 5 next year, or this year. This is 2021. The actual top 5 were Brian Jones in 5th, Alex in 4th, Breon in 3rd, Terrence in 2nd, and Chris won his 2nd consecutive Classic Physique Olympia title. Now, Brian Jones, he's known as Lord Jones on Instagram. If you follow him, if you don't follow him, follow him. He's Lord Jones. He was someone I didn't even have on my radar, really, to do this well at this Olympia. He had won the 2020 Chicago Pro to qualify. I wasn't at that show, but looking at pics from the show, I thought Brian had tremendous structure, but from a musculature standpoint, he looked a little small in the upper body to me. I thought he looked like he had great potential, but I would not have thought that he would make the top 5 at this year's Olympia. Well, I was at this Olympia, and I got to say that the judges got this placing absolutely right. He looked amazing. By himself, the guy looks like Mr. Olympia, right? His structure is great. His conditioning and his presentation were impeccable, and his size seemed fine. But once he was in the mix with the other top guys, you could tell his physique needs a little more size, a little more muscle maturity to crack that top 3. He's certainly going to do that in the near future, I'm sure. He could eventually be Chris Bumstead's toughest competition, really. He's got amazing structure. Now, Alex placed 4th, and he looked great doing so. This guy's really just a great bodybuilder. He's got terrific symmetry, proportion, balance, flow. He's very, very complete. He's a 2020 Arnold Classic champion for a reason, and he's going to continue to be one of the division's top guys for some time to come. I can guarantee that. Now, the top 3 of the show was really interesting. The way things were going during prejudging, it seemed that the judges had Chris and Breon in the top 2. They were compared a lot, and they maintained the center position so that the call-outs and comparisons. Going into finals, I pretty much just assumed that Terrence was 3rd. And about Terrence, he's one of, if not the most improved guys in the entire league in 2020. He looked amazing at the Arnold Classic. He was amazing here as well. Easily one of the greatest posing artists, not just in Classic Physique today, not just in the IFBB Pro League today. He's without question, in my mind, one of the greatest posing artists of all time, period. Classic Physique, presentation is probably more important than in the other men's bodybuilding divisions, but it doesn't mean much if you don't bring the goods, and Terrence really brought the goods this year. I'll get back to him in a little bit. As far as Breon goes, Yeah, I thought Breon looked great. I actually had him in second going into finals, and that's partially because of how good he looked, and also largely because of what the judges were doing with the call-outs and comparisons. It just seemed like he was second, and something really interesting happened towards the end of finals. Breon and Chris were centered, and Terrence was on the other side of Breon. And during back double biceps, the guys were bumping elbows and not, they were jockeying for position. Head judge Steve Weinberger had yelled at, spread out. But the elbows continued to go, and just then Steve sounded pretty angry, and he told Breon to Terrence to switch places. The audience popped. It was a really favorable response, and just like that, the momentum changed, and I'll get back to that in a moment, but first let me talk about Chris. Chris Bumstead. If Terrence isn't the most improved guy of 2020, it's got to be Chris. And that's really impressive considering that Chris was already the defending Olympia champion. Any weak points that Chris may have had in the past, which have always really been his upper arms and his back thickness and the depth of detail there, they were all improved, especially his back. I mean, it was clear very early on that Chris had retained his title. The guy just has a structure that when matched with that completeness and conditioning, the conditioning that he and Coach Ian Valier brought to the stage, it just makes him very hard to beat. Whereas the last 2 years, it came down to 1 point difference for him. This year, I would have to say it was a very dominant win. I don't see him losing this title anytime soon, certainly not in 2021. Now, there was a 1 point difference this year, and that 1 point difference was between Terrence and Breon. Now, lots of people were speculating that the elbow throwing is what led to the shift between second and third for Breon. I don't know. It was obviously very close. There was just 1 point difference. So they both looked great. Just amazing. And to me, it could have gone either way, but I have to say that the judges did an amazing job. This top five was just very, very solid. Yeah, so that pretty much wraps up my coverage for the 2020 Olympia for now. As the weeks go by, I am sure it will be brought up quite a bit, at least until the next or first big show of 2021. In future episodes, I'll be talking about various historic contests and individuals, as well as having major guests on the show for interviews and conversations. So stay tuned. I want to say thanks again for supporting. Stay tuned for all the future episodes that will be coming up. And for now, this is Michael Bryson for This is Bodybuilding saying thanks.